Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is module 2 of month 1 of your perimenopause, your invention program by Perimenopause Playbook. And we're just going to go straight through it. But before we start, by now you have received your workbook for module 2, and hopefully you have worked on your exercises in module 1, because subsequent modules are building off of previous modules. So it's really important that you worked through that, particularly for the people in Reinvention Essentials, because we haven't had a chance to make one-on-one. And don't forget, this week is your group coaching session. It happens every 2 weeks. And this is week 2. So the group coaching session is this week. Right, having said that, let's move on to the content of module 2. So today we would be talking about personal environmental triggers. And the theme for today is understanding how your environment impacts your cognitive and emotional states. And then we will talk about how to tailor our environment to support our wellness journey. Our objectives are to identify specific environmental stressors in your home environment. We're going to build a personalized sensory profile, and they'll identify intentional safe zones to help you to compress, recharge, and navigate through your transitional phase effectively. Right, so section 1 is identifying specific environmental stress points in the home. We're going to start by understanding what cognitive stress points are. So, cognitive stress points are these environmental factors that overstimulate your brain. And by overstimulating your brain, they create these cortisol spikes. And then those cortisol spikes disrupt your emotional regulation and focus. Now, I would like to um, quickly add here that cortisol on its own is not a bad thing. It's because it's been demonized a lot by social media, not clarifying what cortisol actually does. Our bodies need cortisol to start the day, to maintain focus, to become active in the morning. And that's why the first thing you should do in the morning when you wake up is to expose your eyes to low low angle sunrise. And what this does is it communicates to your brain to release cortisol, and that cortisol is what would trigger focus and um, energy to get through the day. Where cortisol is harmful is if you're triggering cortisol release at the wrong time of day, also known as the evening and nighttime, when melatonin should be released into your bloodstream, or you're being exposed to environmental stressors that are creating cortisol spikes, which then becomes a bit too much cortisol in your system, which then leads to stress um, states. And that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about cognitive stress points, right? So, having clarified that, um, cortisol spikes in this regard disrupts emotional regulation and focus. And these can stem from physical or intangible ones. For instance, let's say, a cluttered environment or inadequate lighting systems in your space, which forces your brain to work extra hard, which stresses your brain out, among other things. So let us talk about a bit of research. I'm not going to bore you with all the research. If you're interested in reading more about the research, there's all the links are in the text version of this video training. So if you're interested, go there. You can click on the links, and it takes you directly to the relevant research. So I'm just going to run through this research really quickly. In a research in Science Direct, it was shown that natural environments are found to be associated with low frequency brain waves and reduced frontal brain activity. And what this basically means in lay speak is, imagine your brain is like a radio, right? Radio sends signals. And when you're in a peaceful forest or a park or a well designed interior space, your brain plays soft, slow music that helps you feel calm and happy. And scientists found that in nature, or nature identical environments, your brain makes these gentle waves that are like soothing music, and that makes you feel relaxed and refreshed. And conversely, when you're in a busy city with lots of noise and flashing lights and and basically in a disruptive environment, it's like a radio that's playing loud, fast music. Think heavy metal. This makes your brain work harder and can make you feel stressed or upset. So essentially, nature helps your brain to relax, or nature identical spaces makes your brain relax, and if environmental triggers that stress the brain out make it feel overwhelmed. I hope I've been able to explain that in as easily as I hope that's been really easy to understand. Right. So, why is it important to identify these stress points? When your environment triggers stress, your nervous system stays in a heightened state, meaning that your nervous system is remains in this low grade inflammation and stress state, and that reduces your ability to think clearly or recover emotionally. And studies have shown that um, stressors in our environments deplete our cognitive resources because it's been shown that can process, the brain receives about 1.4 billion impressions at a time, but it can only process 40 to 50 of those 1 billion. So imagine if you're overloading your brain with so much sensory input, your brain has to work extra hard. And if your brain, imagine if you're working too hard, you're working harder than you need to say at work. What happens to you? You start to feel stressed out. You start to lose concentration, and that's basically what happens in the brain. So our cognitive resources become depleted when it's overwhelmed and it's not able to process the important data as effectively as if it had just the right amount of data and had the right kind of support to process that data. Yeah. So having said that, we're going to start identifying emotional stressor categories. There's a couple of them. The first is lighting. Now, lighting significantly influences what's called our brain's chiasmatic, our brain's suprachiasmatic nucleus, and that's the part of the brain that governs the circadian rhythm. And if you have listened to my podcast on sleep, you would have learned that our circadian rhythm is our internal body clock, and it is heavily influenced by our exposure to natural light and also hindered by our exposure to artificial light sources as well. So, take for instance, you wake up in the morning and you get that morning sunlight into your eyes and you're ready to face the day, and then you are heading towards evening time and you're still exposed to the same level of intensity, light intensity that you needed to be focused and alert during the day. What happens to the brain? The brain continues to receive signals that tells it to remain alert and active, which means that you'll not be able to get to sleep. However, if you tailor your environment and your exposure to light to support the way your brain is designed to work, meaning in the evening time, think of the moonlight and think of nighttime. It's dark. The brain is designed to adapt its um, chemical and neural activity to the time of day. So if you have bright overhead lighting in the evenings, or you have white light in the evenings, or blue light spectrum in the evenings, your brain is not going to release melatonin, which is needed for sleep. So yeah, so that's that on lighting, on the introduction of why lighting is important to identify as an environmental stressor. So points to remember: natural light exposure enhances the production of serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter that regulates our mood, promotes our focus, and combats depression. Two, inadequate lighting can cause seasonal affective disorder, which is a form of depression that's tied to reduced light exposure during certain seasons. And by certain seasons, I mean um, in the winter or when it's close to winter, when we're starting to, if you live in a part of the world that experiences winter, you would know that we get shorter days and longer nights in the winter months, which means that we have access to less natural light, which then causes this condition in our brains. But it can be mitigated by exposing ourselves to the right amount of light artificially. There are circadian light systems that help with that. And the third is that dim lighting creates visual strain and can heighten a sense of stress in our brain. Now, the fourth lighting point to remember, and this is really, really crucial to remember because a lot of our lighting strategies lean heavily on this image here, the infographic in this image here. If you look, you see that the light temperature scale to your left, to my left, is we start with warm light, then daylighting, then cold light, right? So warm lighting in the range of 2700 to 3000 Kelvin, that's highlighted in the circle, mimics the soothing glow of sunsets. And this range fosters relaxation. However, on the cooler end of the scale, where you have the middle scale here, where you see daylight between 4000 and 5000 Kelvin, that boosts alertness but may feel clinical if overused and becomes more clinical and aggravating to the brain the cooler it gets. So if it starts to go from this lovely pale yellow to white, that's the height of daylight, and then you have the blues starts going to the blue range. The bluer the light spectrum is, the more stressful it will be for your brain. So it's important to understand that moving forward, because to remember this moving forward, because that we're going to be referring back to the light temperature scale many times in the course of this program. Right. So, what are the actionable tips um, that we can adapt right now? The steps to understanding the how our spaces function right now with this environmental trigger called lighting. The first thing to do is to audit your space. So I understand that we're all busy people, so I'm not expecting you to do this during the week. So take your time, pick a day that works for you. If you work on your own business or you have time off during the week, that's perfect. But if you're not able to, the weekend is fine as well. Spend a day observing how lighting changes in your environment. So what I mean by this is from the moment you wake up in your bed, look around you and pay attention to the quality of light, natural light that's coming into your space. Um, the bedroom, depending on a case in point, I'm going to tell a little story here. We had a client one time who they were building and working with architects, and this is what we call a lighting plan. I was working on the lighting plan for the architect, and the client specifically wanted certain light qualities in different zones of their house. So he particularly wanted to wake up with his bedroom flooded with natural light, flooded with sunlight. That and by flooding your space with sunlight in the morning means that your window needs to face the west because the sun rises in the west and sets in the east. I hope you're correct with that. So so the architects had to specify locating the bedroom window, the largest source of light, to the west. And that allowed for the client to have that just a lovely wash of sunlight in this space in the morning. And that's usually ideal if you're building or you're buying or you're renting, um, the first thing we want to do is have access to morning sunlight. So ideally, look, facing the rising sun as you wake up in the morning is the perfect location for you. If it's not possible, you can always go out and get that morning sunlight. Go for a walk, go for a run if you have a balcony, or if you have a garden, go out there, make sure that you're getting that morning sunlight into your eyes. And yeah, so spend the day observing, starting from when you wake up in the morning, the quality of the light, how much light comes in, what parts of your space is still shrouded in darkness, even though um, it, the further you go into the day, and especially at midday, that's a perfect time to fully see how much light your space gets, especially the spaces where you desire a large quantity or a good quality supply of natural lighting. So, yeah, so just observe how the lighting changes in your environment. Um, and like I said, identify areas that feel too dim or overly bright or unbalanced. And from there, we can then begin to diagnose the space to understand what parts need more lighting, what parts need less lighting, and what parts remain the same. So that's that with number one, which is auditing your space. Number two is to upgrade to warm LEDs. If you remember the infographic that I showed you, warm lighting and cool lighting. Warm lighting is calming. Daylighting is still on the warm scale, but it's right there in the middle. It's kind of cool, kind of warm. It's balanced, like the color green. So as opposed to, I know that there are so many spaces that I've seen and worked on where there's fluorescent lights. It's super blue light, and that is so bad for your brain health. So upgrade to warm LEDs. Replace the fluorescent or overly bright bulb with warm LED lighting for a calming atmosphere. And here again, with regards to bright overhead lights, as long as it's not white light, in order to, if you're not looking to do a complete overhaul or buy new light fittings or fixtures, there's a really easy fix to this. Install a dimmer switch, but be sure that your light fixture is compatible with the dimmer switch that you get. And a dimmer switch is the easiest way to regulate the intensity of your light. So yeah, so a dimmer switch is an absolute game changer for any light fixture, just as long as you get the right dimmer switch type for the light fixture that you have. The third is to enhance natural light. So after you've audited your space, say for instance, there's a space in your home where that that gets so much light, and the space is, say, for instance, it's your meditation space. In a meditation space, we want the lighting to be calm and soothing, not super strong. So, in the case of, say, your space for relaxation and meditation, we would use um, window treatments that dampen the intensity of light coming in, as well as dampen the intensity of the supportive artificial lighting that we use. But in spaces where we need to have a good source of natural light coming in, and we have heavy curtains, we have to swap out those heavy curtains for lighter ones like linen or any sheer material that is organic and doesn't have toxins in them. A case in point is for me, I, in the summer, tend to lean more towards a combination of over curtains, those are the heavier ones, that I can pull across the window because the days are longer. And once it's nighttime, I want to be able to fall asleep regardless of whether the sun sets at 10 p.m. or not. So I have that. And then I have the light share ones underneath. So if the light is too bright, those share curtains tend to do a good job of sort of like dampening the intensity of the light coming in. However, in the winter months, I remove those heavy curtains because those heavy curtains are would be blocking and preventing maximum ingress of natural light into my space. So that's an idea that you can adopt to adapting your space to changing season and according to your needs. And four is to use mirrors and reflective surfaces. I would say this with a caveat. Use mirrors and reflective surfaces intentionally and intelligently and strategically because many spaces have overused this to the point where it has become a pain where now you have glare, and glare is just as bad as harsh overhead lighting. So strategic use of mirrors and reflective surfaces helps to reflect and bounce light around the space and brighten darker recesses of your home if you need it. And the fifth is to consider daylight bulbs. Now, this is the same infographic here that I showed at the beginning. So daylight bulbs is right here in the center where you have the sun peeking out from the back of the cloud and full sun. So daylight bulbs are perfect for spaces where natural light is limited, but they're also they're also just as effective in any space, especially during the daytime, in your workspace or your function spaces. And they're right smack in the middle, and they're the perfect temperature for keeping your brain active without overwhelming it. So it's also important to note that while daylight bulbs are great for mimicking daylight, it is also integral to consider circadian lighting that changes temperature of the day. So circadian lighting is an intelligent lighting system where the lighting temperature and intensity changes throughout the day to mimic the transition of the sun to sunrise to sunset and then the moonrise as well. It's brilliant. If you can have it installed, perfect. If not, they're, they're easy fixes. You layer the lighting in your space, install dimmer switches, manually switch from overhead lights to wall sconces to floor lighting to table lamps. And that sort of creates a dynamism that you can adjust to fit whatever time of day you are or whatever mood you're trying to create in the space. And number six is to layer that lighting, like I just said that earlier. Layering lighting means choosing a mix of ambient and task and accent lighting, as well as overhead lighting as well, in the form of recessed ceiling lights or chandeliers or pendant lighting. And what this does is creates this beautiful dynamism in your space where you can change from being hyper alert when you need it. That's with overhead lighting, your chandeliers on, and everything. Towards the middle of the day, where you have mid-level lighting, that's your wall sconces, some of your table lamps and things. And then at nighttime, when you don't need overhead lighting or those wall sconces, you have like recessed lighting, you have your accent lighting, you have your table lamps, and that sort of acclimatizes your brain to the different phases of the day, and you can control that artificially. So that's what lighting layer does for you. And another term that we use for it is painting your room, painting your space with light. It's a beautiful thing. A beautifully designed lighting plan brings your space to life, as you can see in that image. Compared to a space that has just one flat ceiling light or table lamps, there's just not as much visual interest going on as it's going on in this space. Right, so that's on environmental stressor one, that is lighting. Let's move on to environmental stressor two, which is noise pollution. So, environmental noise exposure is believed to impact the brain and cognitive function because of its harmful effects on various aspects, such as learning, sleep, stress, which leads to learned helplessness. And learned helplessness comes from being in an environment that with with noises you can control and noise that you can't control, and these undermine an individual's sense of control and self-efficacy, and then it decreases your confidence, your level of confidence and motivation. A lot of the time we're not aware that we're feeling these um, this that our mindset is tuned into this way of being because we're not paying attention to it, right? So once we understand that noise can create these outcomes in our mental states, we then start to see how we can mitigate the challenges that we're facing as a result of noise pollution. Now, what's the deal with noise pollution? Chronic noise activates the brain's amygdala, and that's the part of the brain that sort of acts as a gate, as it, that's our emotional and stress response system. And this chronic noise heightens our stress responses and then releases cortisol, which is a stress hormone. Remember earlier when I said cortisol itself is not bad, but consistent triggering of that stress hormone, cortisol, can lead to low grade inflammation in the brain. And that then leads to difficulty concentrating, it increases your irritability, and has long term impacts on cardiovascular health. Now, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision making and focus, is also sensitive to sound distractions because even subtle noises like, say, the hum of an appliance or distant traffic can disrupt cognitive processes by pulling attention away from tasks. And remember when I said earlier that the brain can only process so much information coming from its environment. And so when it's dealing with so much environmental inputs, that it's incapable of focusing on what you need it to focus on, that creates a stress response, right? So now that we know what noise pollution does and how it affects the brain, let's talk about actionable tips that we can adopt right now. First is identify irritating noise sources. So common culprits in um, urban areas are traffic, loud neighbors, a lot of the time we can't help it, or appliance homes. And what can we do about this? There are many ways that we can mitigate this. First, we can adopt noise canceling headphones. And they're especially useful if you're in a noise environment or if you're working in the office and you work in an open plan office and you need to concentrate, you can just pop in your noise canceling headphones and that works a treat. Another solution is white noise machines or apps. I particularly love to use subliminal sounds. It's a type of noise masking. I use bird songs and it's free, it's on YouTube. There's so many nature sounds that run for 11, 12, sometimes 24 hours. And you can keep it on for as long as you want. And once that is turned on, I find that I'm more focused on what I'm doing, particularly recently with with the development that's going on next door to me, where during the day, especially if I open my windows, the disruption is crazy loud and I can't get anything done. So I use those subliminal sounds to help me to help calm my nervous system and focus my attention to what's needed. And this is a beautiful thing about nature sounds. Nature sounds playing in the background don't disrupt the brain, and it's got something to do with brainwave states. There is a podcast on brainwave states that I put on. I'm going to dig a little deeper into the podcast series. I have like um, 10 different sort of uh, topics on that subject that I'm still going to explore. So yeah, so if you want to listen to that, look for brainwave states in my podcast, and it's really interesting. So the third thing you can do is to soundproof. So you can add rugs, curtains, or wall panels to absorb sound in echo-prone rooms. And another point is to curate your soundscape. So experiment with like I have with the nature sounds. Experiment with playlists or nature inspired sounds to find what enhances your mood and productivity. So that is environmental stressor 2. Let's move on to environmental stressor 3, which is clutter, the almighty clutter. Now, this is a challenge everybody has, including me, because things just build up. And if we're not paying attention, even though we are known to be tidy, tidy people, clutter can build up really easily because life is in continuum, isn't it? And we're constantly doing things in our space, and we're moving around, we're getting things done. So it's very very likely for things to build up and clutter to grow if we're not paying attention to clutter in our space. So yeah, so like I said, it's a feature that keeps creeping up on us, even though we're diligent or we keep our spaces neat and tidy. Clutter significantly affects our psychology, our psychological states by reducing our focus and increasing our stress levels. And research supports this um, by showing that clutter overwhelms the brain, diverting energy from tasks needed for, from tasks needing attention to managing chaos. So imagine if you're trying to get things done and your brain is scanning its environment for just scanning its environment like it usually does. And then there's clutter everywhere and it's busy trying to process things in its periphery and you're not able to focus fully on what you need to do. That overwhelms the brain. And it can also evoke a sense of guilt or shame. That is more on the psychology side of things. Um, because sometimes we hang on to things or parts of our selves, our old selves, from sentimental value, and we don't want to throw them away. So we feel guilty for hanging on to them, and we feel guilty for throwing them away. So that's a whole different subject to explore. But the mental energy that we spend on clutter drains our resources and it hinders engagement in what truly matters. Now, here are key points to remember on clutter. The first is that visual clutter competes for the brain's attention by overloading the visual cortex and increasing cognitive load. The second, um, research in environmental psychology links cluttered environments to feelings of helplessness, feelings of decreased focus, and even depressive symptoms because our brain craves order and tidy spaces help support mental organization. The third is a clutter-free space enhances the perception of control and fosters a sense of calm. The fourth is that people experience different thresholds for clutter tolerance. I've seen this so many times. But universally, clutter spaces are less functional and more emotionally draining. So at the end of the day, on the subject of clutter or lighting or any of the things that we've talked about, this is why it's important to personalize it to the individual because it's not a one size fits all. The science is sound. However, there are nuances in human biology that gives room for tolerances and intolerances. And that's why it's important to understand the individual and their tolerances or intolerances so that we can build a strategy that works for the individual. Now, actionable tips to deal with clutter. Start small. Again, your brain needs to handle one or two tasks at a go. If you're overwhelmed with too much stuff, you're going to end up in a stress state. So start small. Again, small looks different for different people. For you, it could be one space, for you, it could be two spaces, for you, it could be a small space to start with. And for others, it could be a larger space. So it all depends on You being your own detective and understanding what your tolerances are, and that will help you better understand yourself and understand what works for you and what doesn't work for you. So choose a manageable area for you and declutter that first. And then use the one in, one out rule, which means for every new item, remove an existing one. We have to be militant about this and dispassionate in most cases on this one in, one out rule, and be intentional with what we're introducing so that um, it makes sense to replace it with what we're letting go of. Now, and three is to focus on high impact decluttering zones. So focus first on the areas you use the most. That's like high traffic areas like your kitchen or your workspace or your living room. And these have the greatest impact on daily stresses. And finally, adopt a maintenance habit. Dedicate 5 to 10 minutes a day tidying up your space, and that would prevent clutter from accumulating. And the more you do it, it takes, some people say it takes 21 days to establish any habit. Neuroscience on rewiring the brain for new cognitive habits says 66 days. It varies from person to person. So the point here is the more regularly you do stuff, if you do a particular habit, the more your brain starts to associate that with regularity, and the easier it will become for you to, in this case, declutter and prevent clutter from accumulating. So that's environmental clutter, environmental stressor three, which is clutter. The fourth is unpleasant scents. Now, I love smells, I love perfumes, I love essential oils, and I absolutely hate anything that doesn't smell remotely satisfying to my brain. And our sense of smell is so closely tied to the limbic system, which governs emotions and memory. And that's why sometimes when you smell, something you smell can trigger a bad memory, or something smell can trigger a really happy memory or a nostalgic experience. And these unpleasant smells can subconsciously activate your amygdala, and what this does is it causes a stress response, even if the source of that smell is very small. And aromatherapy studies show that specific scents, such as lavender, stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, that's your rest and digest system, which then reduces anxiety and promotes relaxation. Citrus scents also, I mean, many different scent profiles. Again, personalize it, be your own detective, know what works for you. I, for instance, am not a fan of lavender, despite the science that shows that lavender is calming and it promotes sleep. I agree. I've used it before, but there's just something about the undertones of lavender that I'm not crazy about. That I would rather use another scent profile that I love. And my favorite, my go-to is patchouli with cedarwood and myrrh. A blend of those three, sometimes with petit gras, sometimes with sometimes with orange. It's just a beautiful blend, and I would choose that over lavender any day. So yeah, so you it's this is also highly subjective, but what the general rule is that lavender stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. Other scent profiles stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. And a case here is if, for instance, somebody identifies lavender, or someone connects lavender to a traumatic past experience, it's not going to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. It's going to be doing the exact opposite of that. And that's why science is great. Science is the truth. That said, it is still subjective to individual and personal experience. And that's why it is important to personalize for you. Right. So, um, yeah. So it's already down there. Personal scent preferences vary. Some individuals may find strong perfumes overstimulating. while others may associate particular scents with comforting memories. Right, so how do we deal with unpleasant smells in our space? The first is to neutralize bad odors, especially in areas that are prone to odor build up, like trash bins and sinks, sink drains, and our carpeting. I, for one, use I I pour bleach down my sink drains, my bathroom drains, my down my toilet as well. Everything that goes down into the sewer system, I drench in bleach once a week. Other times I use bicarbonate of soda with vinegar because I love all the bubbly effect of that. But I find that bleach is way more efficient for me than bicarbonate of soda. So I do that once a week, and that is great at neutralizing potential bad odors and just keeping my my drains fresh and clean, as well as my bin area or anywhere else in my space where I'm prone to have odor buildup. I you know and of course do your laundry regularly because that's another place where bad odors can build up, especially if it's gym wear. And two, use odor as absorbing materials like activated charcoal or baking soda in problem areas. I used to have these uh I used to have this activated charcoal pochettes. They're like little pouches that I hang in my wardrobe. And activated charcoal is great at detoxifying. It detoxifies you internally. It can detoxify the skin. I use it as a face mask as well, and it also absorbs bad odors from the air. So that's amazing for um, combating unpleasant smells. The third is to introduce calming scents. Now, there's so many scents that I can use. You find what works for you to relax. Uh, Earlier mentioned lavender, there's chamomile. I love chamomile. There's sandalwood, cedarwood. There is patchouli. Patchouli is brilliant. Not everyone likes patchouli, but for me, I love patchouli. Yeah, so you find what works for you in your bedrooms or your safe zones. To energize yourself, citrus is there's a general consensus that citrus is amazing. Peppermint is a little subjective, but peppermint is also quite invigorating, and they're perfect for workspaces or kitchens to give you that invigorating, that invigorating feeling. And of course, experiment with delivery methods. I use diffusers. I made. I used to make scented candles. At one point, I almost burnt my house down because I used too much essential oils. So be careful if you're making your own candles. And if you're buying scented candles, make sure that they're toxin free. They're free of volatile organic compounds that are bad for you. Or air sprays. I wouldn't advise for air sprays unless they're organic and eco certified. But make sure that they're based on your preferences, something that you love and something that you enjoy smelling. And also, of course, avoid overpowering scents. And by overpowering scents, I mean artificial fragrances, even if they're nature identical. If artificial fragrances tend to be a bit more overwhelming than if you were using essential oils, for instance. All right, so let's move on to our activity. We're going to create a home stress bar exercise. You would find this in your workbook. That is either you can go there by clicking the link in the text version of this coaching. It's also in the email that I sent to you. Just click through the link and it takes you straight there. And we're going to be assessing your home by noting the following prompts. First, you would identify one overwhelming or chaotic aspect of each room that you choose, and then you will identify the stress that it's causing. So this is something that you have to take a little extra time for yourself. Maybe devote an hour to this exercise. You're being a detective. You're investigating. You're understanding yourself and what stresses you out and what doesn't stress you out. Yes. So you identify the stress that that particular one causes you. Don't do too many at a go because that could be overwhelming. And then you would identify patterns in the colors, the textures, or sounds that contribute to that stress in that space. For example, if you are choosing your kitchen space, is it the cluttered countertops or is it the disorganized cupboards or anything? Just be your own detective. And the key takeaway here is that cognitive stress points can be transformed through intentional changes, but where we would not be able to transform, we would not be able to do any work to transform with intention if we don't already know what the problem is and how to fix it. And then it's after we know the what and the how, the what and the why, that we can then move on to the intentional how. So we just finished section one, which is identifying environmental stress points. Now we're moving on to section two, which is creating a personal sensory profile. So what is a sensory profile? A sensory profile is a map of how sensory inputs like our sense of sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste, how these senses affect our mood, our energy, and our focus. And when we understand our sensory profile, we can then design an environment that supports our well being. Everyone has a unique sensory preference, like we have, as you would have gathered from the previous chats that we've had, because everyone is unique and there are many variances to people's preferences based on culture, society, personal experiences, to name a few. So it's all very um, subjective, as it were. So we need to tailor our environment to align with your unique preferences, and then that will dramatically improve your well-being because it's tailored to you. And with armed with the knowledge that you have, it would evolve with you. So how do we create our profile? We understand our sensory needs. So the first is visual stimulation. Some people thrive in spaces with bold colors and stimulating artwork, while other people thrive in spaces with muted tones and minimalism. I tend to sit somewhere in the middle. I lean more towards muted tones, but I do love me a pop of color. I love mustards. I love jewel tones of green. I love green. Any shade of green, the darker the better. And that's an infusion of color. So it all depends on individuals, and this is where you again personalization helps you create the perfect profile for yourself. So the question you need to ask yourself is this: what colors help me focus, and what color schemes help me relax? And the tip now is to choose color schemes and decor that aligns with your preferences for either stimulation or calm. And by stimulation, I mean high activity zones like your kitchen. The kitchen can be a high activity zone, it can be a relaxed zone as well, depending on what you're doing in the kitchen at the time. Well, you get the point. So, going by case in point, case by case basis, just to touch on particular sensitivities. People with sound sensitivities usually have low auditory thresholds. I have a very low auditory threshold, and disruptive sounds, upset me to no end, which is why when I was looking for an apartment, I insisted on the insulation being airtight. That I would not be able to tolerate noise from my neighbor's house um, filtering into my space. It would drive me crazy. So I have a really low sound sensitivity. So people with low auditory thresholds, like me, may find even small noises distracting, while others may feel energized by background sounds. And I know this is true because I have met quite a few people who love living in the city, and the highlight of their day is throwing open their windows and all of the sounds of the cars and the people talking and just the noises of city life invigorates them. And so, yeah, this is also where it's important to personalize, right? So the actionable tip here, we're talking about people with low auditory thresholds, is to test various soundscapes, silence, ambient music, and nature sounds to discover what enhances your mood and focus. And before I move into the next point here, is those people with higher auditory thresholds, I think that anything goes for them pretty much. I feel like they're more likely to tolerate um, silence than um, they're more likely to tolerate silence. So um, not unfortunately, but interestingly, it's more it's more important to focus on people with low auditory thresholds, especially in perimenopause and postmenopause. Many women have reported having previously been tolerant of loud noises are all of a sudden not able to tolerate as much loud noise. So low auditory thresholds are more likely to be a challenge in women in perimenopause and postmenopause. So that's where it's important to highlight that. So having said that, let's move on to tactile comfort. The texture that you interact with, your furniture, upholstery, or your rugs, your blankets, anything can impact your emotional state. So actionable tip for you is to incorporate soft and comforting fabrics like plush throws or smooth leather to enhance tactile satisfaction. That is just a case in point, an example. There's a world of textures out there that appeal to many different people, and the important bit here is understanding which tactile experience gives you the most satisfaction. Now, on scent preferences, like we've mentioned earlier, also highly subjective, as with everything, but smell is deeply personal. And so find what works for you, what's calming for you, what's stimulating for you, and adjust accordingly to what you need it for at that particular time of day or whatever activity that you're engaging in. So for me, rosemary and citrus, I diffuse that in the morning because it wakes me up and it invigorates me. But patchouli and myrrh and petit grain in the evenings are very calming to me. So I wouldn't diffuse petit grain and myrrh in the morning. That would make me so calm that I wouldn't want to do anything but watch movies and maybe knit or something. And that's not what I'm after. So yeah, so tailored to the particular activity that you need it for, and watch the game change dramatically for you. So the actionable tip is to experiment with essential oils, with incense, non-toxic incense, and eco-certified essential oils, not the diluted ones, not the ones that are hiding pesticides in them, because we want to be as pure as we possibly can. Because volatile organic compounds that contain toxins are very easily able to penetrate the blood-brain barrier through our sense of smell, so our olfactory sense, and that goes straight to the brain, and that causes inflammation, and we don't want that. So it is very important to be sure that it's eco certified and it's not artificial. If it's artificial, it's nature identical. But always check the label and always research the ingredients in there to be sure that it's not toxic. And also, of course, fresh flowers. You can't go wrong with fresh flowers because fresh flowers are organic, right? They come from nature. They're adapted to our biology, and they're amazing. So a bunch of fresh flowers every day is the easiest and most beautiful way to introduce visual and visual and olfactory delights to your space. So if you have access to fresh flowers, by all means, use fresh flowers. They're awesome. Right. So how do we create our profile? Do that by creating a sensory profile chart. Your sensory profile chart is available again uh, in your workbook. But this sort it's sort of helping you walk through how to use it. So on the table to my right is on the top on the top of the box you have the sense, preferences, stressors, and solutions, and to the left hand side you have your sense of sight, sound, and touch. We have more senses than that, but this is just a case in point. So you list your preferences for each sensory category. That's sight, sound, touch, scent, temperature on the left. Then you identify the triggers. Um, you identify what triggers discomfort or stress, right? Those are stressors. And then you highlight your preferred environmental features. That's preferences. And then you propose a solution. That's at the far right to my right. And if you have any issues with understanding it, um, send me an email, or if send me an email, or if we're doing a one-on-one, we can walk through together. In the group coaching, we can walk through it as well. And after you've done this exercise, you would then identify, case in point again for the site, does natural light energize or overwhelm you? Or does white noise calm or distract you? Or this, you understand and identify what scents ground you or what scents invigorate you. So the activity for your diary exercise is to do this for 3 days, right? Track how home sensory inputs affect your feelings. For instance, bright light at 3 p.m. energizes you, while lighting candles in the evenings calm you. And the key takeaways here are sensory preferences fluctuate with your mood and hormone changes, and a sensory friendly environment is crucial for cognitive wellness and emotional balance. And with that, we have come to the end of module two. I'm really excited. I hope that you have learned a lot from this module, and I look forward to seeing you in module three and on our one on one or group coaching sessions. See you later.